Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder on Weather here. In this update, we've got a major pattern change on the way, so we're really going to break down the details for you in this update and take a look at the overall satellite picture. You can actually see this building ridge of high pressure across a good part of the south, especially into Texas, and that's going to be shifting the storm track up and over the ridge, so it makes all the unsettled conditions across the southeast and along the east coast here. At the same time, we've got a pretty significant trough moving in across the Pacific Northwest. That's going to bring some much chillier conditions for them. But you can see out in the tropics too, we take you all the way out, and it's almost off the screen. This little guy right here, that is the beginning stages of what actually has been upgraded to tropical depression number 3 out there in the open waters of the Atlantic. So if we actually zoom in to those systems, this already looks to be a formidable tropical wave. So they went ahead and upgraded this to tropical depression number 3. And then yet we have another system trailing behind that one, has a 40% probability of also becoming a named storm. So hurricane season is already just about three weeks in, and it looks to become pretty active early on in the season, especially taking advantage of all these warmer waters out here into the Atlantic. So if we take a look at the latest update from the National Hurricane Center, there is the latest update. So we do have a confirmed tropical depression number 3. This is expected to become tropical storm Brett, and this is going to continue west northwest bound and eventually looks to be becoming our first hurricane of the season. And this will impact the Lesser Antilles and get really close to portions of Puerto Rico by the time we head into this weekend. So we've got a formidable system moving westbound about 21 miles an hour. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye on this one, especially as it gets near the Lesser Antilles. So out in the US, it's all about the heat, folks, for the deep south, especially into Texas. I mean, look at all those areas of just excessive heat warnings into Louisiana as well. This is dangerous stuff, folks. It's the feels like conditions. It's those higher dew points approaching almost into the 80-degree range, makes the feel like 110, 120 degrees. Unfortunately, there's still actually people without power there in East Texas that has no AC for the last couple of days, and they're going to getting those 110, 120 degree feels like temperatures. Dangerous stuff. This is a deadly combination down there in Texas. At the same time, those are actually freeze warnings out there in Oregon, where they're expecting some really chillier conditions. But this is where all the rain is going to be really elongating and setting up across the southeast, and especially along the east coast here into the Carolinas, where I'm expecting torrential rain. So let's take a look at the setup going forward. Here's the severe setup going forward for today. So as this ridge continues to build across the middle of the country, storms are going to be going up and over the ridge with this particular setup. So it puts the placement along portions of the deep south, getting into Florida with all the stronger storms, slightly severe storms, but we could have some tornadic activity along the deep south in and around the I-20 corridor, especially down there and towards the Mobile region into the Pensacola region. Those areas could have an isolated spin up tornado or two later on this afternoon, but the very heavy rain is, I think, is going to be eventually taking the headlines, especially across the southeast and portions of the east coast. It's going to be really all complements of this particular setup. So how this is actually going to unfold is we've got the ridge really starting to build across the deep south into the southern plains. And then you see, once you get to Oklahoma and Kansas, you got a little bit of a weakness here. That sets the trough out here off the east coast. That puts all the unsettled conditions and actually the cooler conditions off the southeast coast and much of the Carolinas. At the same time, we've got a building ridge of high pressure to the north up into Canada and a good part of the Great Lakes. But it's completely opposite across a good part of the Pacific Northwest, where they're going to be experiencing really chillier conditions and even probably some snow, and even in some of the higher elevations up here into the Pacific Northwest. So yes, the setup heading into Tuesday, again, it's up and over the ridge, puts the placement of the severe storms across Louisiana and portions of I-20 corridor and back into Florida with more heavier rains. But look further to the north. That's fairly significant change, as we're going to be starting to see more high plains type severe storms as the ridge will continue to lift further north. That puts the severe storms further north, so back into the central plains and into the northern plains, and that's only going to amplify as we get deeper into the weeks. But here's the concern going forward, is just the excessive amount of rainfall. So up here in the Pacific Northwest, this is just kind of light showers up here, but it's a cooler shower. That's a cool flow coming off the coast there. So it's going to be pretty wet and pretty chilly for a good part of the Pacific Northwest. But you can see where the ridge is, where you're high and dry, you're underneath that sinking air. But to the right of there, that's where we have all the heavier rains. And this is the precipitation map just over the next 48 hours, folks. And some of these areas could get multiple inches of rain, but especially up here in South Carolina, going into North Carolina, they could be looking at 6 to possibly 8 inches of rain in and around towards the Greensboro area, towards the Charlotte region, back into Columbia. Those areas could get hard and inundated with very heavy rainfall over the coming days. So definitely be on high alert. And I don't think it's just a 2-day event. I think it's just an extended compounding event over a period of time, because this whole area is going to continue to remain unsettled. So here's the setup for Thursday. We got a little bit of a change. So what happens Thursday is we have this system. Again, we have the ridge of high pressure locked under the deep south. But this up further northern ridge is amplified over the top. You see this pretty dominating ridge up there in Canada, and that's going to help lower the pressures again underneath. But it's also going to push and kind of backdoor this trough further off into back into East Texas again, and it could bring the storms back into portions of Oklahoma and eastern Texas, maybe even creeping closer to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, maybe on that Thursday time frame. With the unsettled weather continuing to remain over the southeast, and again, the cooler conditions going to continue to remain over a good part of the west. So going forward, if we take a look at this setup as the breakdown over the next 5 days, as far as on the temperature front, you can see it's pretty significant, right? You got the ridge of high pressure across the southern plains. You've got the much cooler air mass across the Pacific Northwest and much of the West Coast. You got an amplifying ridge over the top. And then you have the unsettled weather across the southeast and off the East Coast. But what's going to happen is, yes, where we have that clash right here across the northern plains, we're going to be starting to see significant severe storms up here in this region, especially as we head into Thursday, Friday time frame, and these are going to be racing across. So I do feel places like into Nebraska, into the Dakotas, back into Minnesota, and eventually maybe even creep into Wisconsin by the time we get into deeper into this upcoming weekend is definitely not out of the question with this upcoming weather pattern. So if we break this thing down for you, here's the latest learning model and kind of depicts that, right? So it has the ridge coming over the top. So by the time we head into, say, Wednesday, your Thursday, your Friday, this whole area is going to be more amplified coming out of the Dakotas. And I think this is eventually going to be shifting off further off to the east, putting more of the Dakotas into play, back into Minnesota into play with those stronger severe storms. So the highlight's going to shift away from the southern plains and away from the southeast as far as the severe weather front, and push it up further north into the central plains and the northern plains, especially as we get deeper into this upcoming week. So if you break down the overall precipitation just between now and Friday, it's pretty evident, guys. So between, say, Thursday, now and Thursday going into Friday, you can see where the dry slots are, right? Where you have that ridge of high pressure, you've got those dry slots. And this is the copious amounts of rain that we're expecting across a good part of the southeast, but especially into the Carolinas. They probably get hit the hardest, and especially North Carolina, back into Virginia, definitely gets hit hard, and that actually creeps back into Kentucky. It's not until that backdoor trough maybe sneaks a little bit and forms a weakness in the overall ridge, could sneak the storm track for at least one day back into Oklahoma and back into portions of the Dallas-Fort Worth, North Texas region before it pushes backward and back more, shifting backwards and back into portions of the Southeast. You can actually see that by the time we head into your deeper into the Saturday time frame. So the ridge would come back, right? So you got maybe a little bit of a reprieve, but the ridge comes back, and this whole same pattern continues to be amplified even further. And I do feel by then we're going to have this ridge is going to be fairly dominant with the cooler air aloft coming in across the northern plains. This puts this whole setup across the Dakotas, and then eventually going to shift off into Minnesota and back into Wisconsin with those severe storms probably starting into this weekend, with the most intense storms as the pattern really starts to be more amplified by then. So moving along, if we take a look at the overall precipitation anomalies, precipitation as we go into this weekend, with the overall trough moving back over the Southeast, that puts all the instability back over into this region across the Southeast, probably lifting further north this time. So the first 5 days has the Northeast fairly dry, but when it comes back, that's going to be able to more elongate this trough and actually shift it further north as well. So as the ridge will start to weaken a little bit further to the north, it allows this instability to come up from the south, and that's exactly what's going to play out as we head into this weekend. So these areas back into Pennsylvania, getting into upstate New York, and across a good part of the Northeast is going to be back into the rain probabilities by then, while much of the plains is going to be in the severe weather front as we head into the weekend. So if we break down the next 5 days of a precipitation, not the front 5 days, but the ending 5 days, so say from the 24th to the 29th time frame of June, again, it puts the high pressure just locked and loaded over the deep south and much of the central, southern plains and much of the southwest. And then the trough would be over the top. So this is a cooler air mass coming in off the coast. And then you have more unsettled weather, likely severe storms through Montana, through the Dakotas, through Minnesota, fishtailing down into portions of Wisconsin. And then the southern branch would shift off across portions of the Ohio Valley, getting into the mid-Atlantic and heading up into the Northeast on those last 5 days through that 24th to say the 29th, time frame. So the overall 10-day breakdown kind of sets up shop like this, where we have two dominant ridges of high pressure. One across the deep south really doesn't go anywhere for the next 10 days. And then you have a little bit of a weakness once you enter portions of Kansas, would allow that trough to really start to just be more amplified. Remember, it sets up, and then it shifts a little bit back, and then it shifts back again. So overall, those areas remain below average, and then out west, they remain below average, while the middle of the country to the northern, central, and northern plains starts to activate the severe storms. So the breakdown in the tropics, let's take a look at the overall ensembles on the European model, because we do have that named storm, and it is expected to become a hurricane by the time we head into, say, Thursday, maybe Friday timeframe. It'd be somewhere towards the Lesser Antilles. So right now it's in a pretty favorable environment, but once we head into the Caribbean, it becomes very unfavorable. And a lot of the guidances, have it kind of like more or less kind of petering out once it gets towards portions of Puerto Rico. So, but that's 7 days out. So we'll definitely extend this. But right now, as far as the next 10 days, the European ensembles have little to hardly anything creeping into the Western Caribbean. And of course, they have got nothing coming into the Gulf of Mexico and along the East Coast. And if we extend the view just on the latest run of the European guidance for the next 10 days, these are the wind threats. So yes, it has that hurricane, possibly portions of the Lesser Antilles, but then really coming across Puerto Rico, and then somewhere before it even hits Jamaica, it could possibly fizzle, by then. That's just over the next kind of 7 days. So So again, this is a long ways out, but overall right now, it looks to become the first hurricane of the season named Brett. So we'll break this thing down for you on the precipitation front for the next 10 days on the latest European guidance. Again, all the weather continues to remain, going to remain well unsettled across a good part of the southeast and much of the east coast. But out in the tropics, yes, it has the storm going towards the Lesser Antilles, but it really doesn't have much into the portions of the Caribbean, especially into the Western Caribbean. These get pretty unsettled weather with some heavier rains, but not from a formidable tropical system. And the latest GFS kind of implies the same way. So it basically has the storm getting to the Lesser Antilles, and then more or less almost likely, if it does hold together, would go out to sea, or it would just kind of fizzle out once this hits a lot of shear that's going to be highlighted over this region as we get into the weekend time frame. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update where I protect you before and after the storm.